Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming together to share in this wonderful, rich text that is before us, both written down in a book and in the faces before us. We are in Parshat Chayei, which is in the book of Genesis at the very start of chapter 23. We'll read through our English translation. I'll share with you a bit of focus study, and then we'll open it up for our collaborative conversation. If you'd like to go ahead and unmute at this time, we can together join in giving thanks for this moment through our blessing. Baruch
atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu so divrei Torah.
Thank you, God, the opportunity to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. I'll share with you the opening verses, and then I'll invite others to have an opportunity to read as well. So chapter 23, verse 1, the book of Genesis. Sarah's lifetime, the span of Sarah's life, came to 127 years. Sarah died in Kiryat Arba, now Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham proceeded to mourn for Sarah and to bewail her. Richard, would you like to read a little bit starting at verse 3?
Yes, Rabbi, thank you. Then Abraham rose from beside his dead and spoke to the children of Heth, saying, I am a resident alien among you. Sell me a burial site among you, that I may remove my dead for burial. And the children of Heth replied to Abraham, saying to him, Hear us, my Lord. You are the elect of God among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our burial places. None of us will withhold his burial place from you for burying your dead. Thereupon Abraham bowed low to the people of the land, the children of Heth, and he said to them, If it is your wish that I remove my dead for burial, you must agree to intercede for me with Ephron, the son of Zohar. Let him sell me the cave of Machpelah, which he owns, which is at the edge of his land. Let him sell it to me in your presence at the full price for a burial site.
Thank you. And Kath, would you like to read starting at verse 10?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. Ephron was present among the Hittites. So Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham in the hearing of the Hittites, all who entered the gate of his town, saying, No, my Lord, hear me. I give you the field, and I give you the cave that is in it. I give it to you in the presence of my people. Bury your dead. Then Abraham bowed low before the people of the land and spoke to Ephron in the hearing of the people of the land, saying, If only you would hear me out. Let me pay the price of the land. Accept it for me that I may bury my dead there. And Ephron replied to Abraham, saying to him, My Lord, do hear me. A piece of land worth 400 shekels of silver. What is that between you and me? Go and bury your dead. Abraham accepted Ephron's terms. Abraham paid out to Ephron the money that he had named in the hearing of the Hittites, 400 shekels of silver at the going merchant's rate.
Thank you. Anna, would you like to read verse 17?
So, excuse me, thank you. So Ephron's land in Machpelah, looking out on Mamre, the field, its cave, and all the trees in the field within its boundaries, passed to Abraham by purchase in the sight of the Hittites and all the town leaders. Afterward, Abraham buried his wife Sarah in the cave of the field of Machpelah, facing Mamre, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. This confirmed Abraham's acquisition from the Hittites of the field and its cave as a fully owned gravesite.
Thank you so much. And let me invite June, would you like to read at the very start of chapter 24?
Thank you, Rabbi. Abraham was now old, advanced in years, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. And Abraham said to the senior servant of his household, who had charge of all that he owned, Put your hand under my thigh, and I will make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of the earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I dwell, but will go to the land of my birth and get a wife for my son Isaac. And the servant said to him, what if the woman does not consent to follow me to this land? Shall I then take your son back to the land from which you came? Abraham answered him, on no account must you take my son back there. The Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from my native land, who promised me on oath, saying, I will assign this land to your offspring. He will send his angel before you, and you will get a wife for my son from there. And if the woman does not consent to follow you, you shall then be clear of this oath to me, but do not take my son back there. So the servant put his hand under the thigh of his master Abraham and swore to him as bidden.
Thank you. Dave, would you like to read starting at verse 10?
Then the servant took 10 of his master's camels and set out, taking with him all the bounty of his master, and he made his way to Ramanim, to the city of Nahor. He made the camels kneel down by the well outside the city at evening time, the time when the women came out to draw water. And he said, O Adonai, God of my master, Abraham's house, grant me good fortune this day and deal graciously with my master Abraham. Here I stand by the spring as the daughters of the townspeople come out to draw water. Let the maiden to whom I say, please lower your jar that I may drink, and who replies, drink and I will water your camels. Let her be the one whom you have decreed for your servant Isaac. Therefore shall I know that you have dealt graciously with my master.
Thank you. All right. And Jim, would you like to read a little bit starting at verse 15?
Thank you, Rabbi. He had scarcely finished speaking when Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor, came out with her jar on her shoulder. The maiden was very beautiful, a virgin whom no man had known. She went down to the spring, filled her jar, and came up. The servant ran toward her and said, please let me sip a little water from your jar. Drink, my lord, she said, and she quickly lowered her jar upon her hand and let him drink. When she had let him drink his fill, she said, I will also draw for your camels until they finish drinking. Quickly emptying her jar into the trough, she ran back to the well to draw, and she drew all for all his camels.
Thank you, Jim. Robin, would you like to read starting at verse 21?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. The man stood staring at her, silent, in order to learn whether or not Adonai had cleared the way for him. When the camels were done drinking, the man took a gold nose ring, a half shekel in weight, and 2 bracelets for her wrists, 10 gold shekels in weight, and said, please tell me, whose daughter are you? Is there a place in your father's house for us to lodge? She said to him, I am Bethuel's daughter. He is the son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nahor. And she added, we have straw and fodder in abundance, as well as a room for lodging. The man kneeled and bowed down to Adonai, saying, blessed is Adonai, God of my master Abraham, whose faithful kindness has not deserted my master. As for me, Adonai led me straight away to my master's brother's house.
Thank you so much. Let me invite Mark. Would you like to pick up there at verse 28? Mark Thompson.
Unmute. Thank you, Rabbi. Verse 28. The maiden ran and told all this to her mother's household. Now Rebekah had a brother whose name was Laban. Laban ran out to the man at the spring. When he saw the nose ring and the bands on his sister's arms, and when he heard his sister Rebekah say, Thus the man spoke to me. He went up to the man who was still standing beside the camel at the spring. Come in, O blessed of the Lord, he said. Why do you remain outside when I have made ready the house and a place for the camels? So the man entered the house, and the camels were unloaded. The camels were given straw and feed, and water was brought to bathe his feet and the feet of the men with him. But when food was set before him, he said, I will not eat until I have told my tale. He said, speak then.
Thank you, Art. Margot, would you like to read starting at verse 34?
Yes, thank you. I am Abraham's servant, he began. The Lord has greatly blessed my master, and he has become rich. He has given him sheep and cattle and silver and gold, male and female slaves, camels and asses. And Sarah, my master's wife, bore my master a son in her old age, and he had assigned to him everything he owns. Now my master made me swear, saying, You shall not get a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites in whose land I dwell, but you shall go to my father's house, to my kindred, and get a wife for my son. And I said to my master, What if the woman does not follow me? He replied to me, the Lord, whose ways I have followed, will send his angel with you and make your errand successful. And you will get a wife for my son, from my kindred, from my father's house. Thus only shall you be freed from my adjuration. If and when you come to my kinsmen, they refuse you, only then shall you be freed from my adjuration.
Thank you. Paul, would you like to continue there at verse 42?
Thank you, Rabbi. I came today to the spring and said, Hashem, God of my master Abraham, if you would graciously make successful the way on which I go, behold, I am standing by the spring of water. Let it be that the young woman who comes out to draw and to whom I shall say, please give me some water to drink from your jug, and who will answer, you may also drink, and I will draw water for your camels too. She shall be the woman whom Hashem has designated for my master's son. I had not yet finished meditating when suddenly Rebekah came out with a jug on her shoulder and descended to the spring and drew water. Then I said to her, please give me a drink. She hurried and lowered the jug from upon herself and said, drink, and I will even water your camels. So I drank, and she watered the camels also. Then I questioned her and said, whose daughter are you? And she said, the daughter of Bethuel, son of Nahor, whom Milcah bore to him. And I placed a ring on her nose and the bracelets on her hands. Then I bowed and prostrated myself to Hashem, and then blessed Hashem, God of my master Abraham, who led me on the true path to take the daughter of my master's brother for his son. And now, if you intend to do kindness and truth with my master, tell me, and if not, tell me, and I will turn to the right or to the left.
Thank you very much, Paul. Martin, would you like to continue there at verse 50?
Yes, Rabbi, thank you. Then Laban and Bethuel answered, the matter was decreed by the Lord. We cannot speak to you bad or good. Here is Rebekah before you. Take her and go, and let her be a wife to your master's son, as the Lord has spoken. When Abraham's servant heard their words, he bowed low to the ground before the Lord. The servant brought out objects of silver and gold and garments and gave them to Rebekah, and he gave presents to her brother and her mother. Then he and the men with him ate and drank, and they spent the night. When they rose next morning, he said, give me leave to go to my master. But her brother and her mother said, let the maiden remain with us some 10 days, and then you may go. He said to them, do not delay me, now that the Lord has made my errand successful. give me leave that I may go to my master. And he said, let us call the girl and ask for her reply. They called Rebekah and they said to her, will you go with this man? And she said, I will. So they sent off their sister Rebekah and her nurse along with Abraham's servant and his men. And they blessed Rebekah and said to her, O sister, may you grow into thousands of myriads. May your offspring seize the gates of their foes.
Thank you so much. Steve, Brenton, would you like to read beginning at verse 61?
Thank you, Rabbi. Rebekah and her servant girls got up and mounted the camels and followed the man, as the slave took Rebekah and went off. Now Isaac was coming from the approach to Be'er Lakai Roi, for he was living in the area of the Negev. Going out toward evening to stroll the field, Isaac looked up and saw camels coming. And Rebekah looked up, seeing Isaac, she got off the camel and said to the slave, who is this man striding in the field coming to meet us? He is my master, said the slave. Taking a veil, she covered herself. The slave then told Isaac all that he had done. And Isaac brought her into the tent of his mother Sarah, and he took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. Thus did Isaac take comfort after the death of his mother.
Thank you so much. Justin, would you like to read at the very start of chapter 25?
And Abraham took another wife, and her name was Keturah. And she bore him Zimram and Jokshan and Medan and Midian and Jishbak and Shuah. And Jokshan begot Sheba and Dedan. And the sons of Dedan were Ashurim, Netushim, and Leumim. And the sons of Midian were Ephah, and Epher, and Enoch, and Abida, and Eldaha. All these were the sons of Keturah. And Abraham gave all that he possessed to Isaac and to the sons of Abraham's concubines. Abraham gave gifts, and he sent them away from his son Isaac while he, Abraham, was still alive, eastward to the land of the east.
Thank you so much. Robert, would you like to read there at verse 7?
Yes, thank you. And these are the days of the years of Abraham's life, which he lived, and 115 years. Then Abraham gave up the ghost and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. And his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar, the Hittite, which is before Mamre. The field which Abraham purchased of the sons of Heth, there was Abraham buried, and Sarah his wife. And it came to pass after the death of Abraham that God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac dwelt by the well Lahai Ror.
Thank you so much. Mark Levinstein, would you like to read starting at verse 12?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. This is the line of Ishmael, Abraham's son, whom Hagar the Egyptian, Sarah's slave, bore to Abraham. These are the names of the sons of Ishmael, by their names in the order of their birth. Nebaioth, the firstborn of Ishmael, Kedar, Adbil, Isam, Mishma, Duma, Masa, Adad, Tema, Chedor, Naphish, and Kedma. These are the sons of Ishmael, and these are their names of their villages, and by their encampments, 12 chieftains of his many tribes. These were the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years. And he breathed his last and died, and was gathered to his kin. They dwelt from Havilah to Shur, which is close to Egypt. All the way to Ashur, they camped alongside all their kinsmen.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, everyone. That's our entire Torah portion for the week. I'd like to share with you a little bit of focused study. If you have a copy of the study sheet, I invite you to take it out at this time. And often when we study this Torah portion, Chayei Sarah, sometimes we focus on the dissonance between the title of the Torah portion and the body of the text, because the title of the Torah portion, Chayei Sarah, the life of Sarah, really tells us not the life of Sarah explicitly, it tells us that she has died. And so there's a lot of commentary and wonderment about what does it mean to have a Torah portion entitled The Life of Sarah when it's really describing the death of Sarah. Well, this year, as I was studying the Torah portion, I was, of course, provoked by that once again, but I also noticed some other aspects of our portion. And one aspect I noted in particular was that Abraham remarries a woman named Keturah and has 6 sons with her. And the 6 sons are mentioned as Justin read their names. And then within just a couple of verses after having mentioned that they've been born, they disappear from the family story. And so I wondered, oh, this is interesting to me that we start off a portion that purports to be talking about Sarah and her life, but in fact, it merely announces her death. And then on top of that, we have 6 new sons born to Abraham. Sons are obviously important. So much text was given not only to Isaac, but also to his other son, Ishmael. And yet these 6 sons are described and then they are gone from the story. Why is that? And then when we look at the woman that he marries, Keturah, there's a lot of commentary about, well, where did she come from and who is this? So if you look at number 1, these are the verses that kind of provoked me anyway, from our Torah portion. The first is from chapter 23, verse 1 and verse 2. The life of Sarah was 127 years. Sarah died. And then from chapter 25, Abraham took another wife whose name was Keturah. And then a verse later, she bore him Zimram, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. So I was provoked this year to see that these are not perhaps separate, distinct storylines, but perhaps they are a composite of an entire picture that Torah is painting for us about what does it mean to have beings who are, on the one hand, present, and then all of a sudden they're gone. Why are they absent from the story, from this particular portion, and from the story as a whole, as far as these 6 sons of Abraham and Keturah go? And then the intriguing notion about Abraham marrying this woman, Keturah. Well, here is, we're going to look at number 2 here. And first we'll focus on the notion of the death of Sarah. So Rashi is going to be quoting here some midrash to try and explain the notion of Sarah's death and why it appears where it does. The death of Sarah is juxtaposed to the binding of Isaac because as a result of the news of the binding, that her son had been readied for slaughter and had been all but slaughtered, her soul flew from her and she died. So this is a bit of midrash explaining that the announcement of Sarah's death occurs here right after the description of the binding of Isaac, the Akedah Yitzhak, as a way to explain what caused her death. She didn't just die of natural causes or old age. She died upon hearing the news that her son Isaac had perhaps almost died. And then we have more midrash about other aspects of this week's Torah portion that we've just noted in the first set of commentaries. And again, Rashi is going to be quoting, referring to some midrash about the name Keturah. Keturah. This is actually Hagar. She's called Keturah because her deeds were pleasing as incense. And the word for incense is Keturah. And so Midrash plays with the name Keturah and sees in it the resonance of another word, Keturah, which means incense. And they're somehow connecting that Hagar was as pleasing as incense because of the kind of person that she was. And so this is really, Keturah is really the same as Hagar. And there's other aspects of the verse of our Torah portion that allow the rabbis to play with this notion because they acknowledge that she comes into this world, into the story, because Isaac, as we were reading it later in the portion, we see that he's coming from Ber Lahai Roe, which is the last time we saw Hagar. That's where she was. And so the notion is that the story that the rabbis will tell us, well, Isaac, after Sarah's death, he goes to find another wife for his father. And so he remembers that he loved Hagar. And so he goes back to the last place that he knew that Hagar had resided, and goes to get her and to bring her back into Abraham's life. So that's how they begin to play with this notion and come up with this story to fill in these gaps. And then as far as these new sons, here's some more midrash that both Rashi will tell us, and we're going to get directly from midrash. Abraham gave gifts. That's from our portion. And then Rashi evokes this midrash. He gave, what are those gifts? The question is, he gave over to them the power to perform sorcery. And then we have on our portion, he sent them eastward to the land of the east. And so Midrash, kind of picking up on the curiosity about, well, why did he do that? And so they come up with this. He counseled them, the farther you can go to the rising of the sun, lest you be burnt by the burning coal of Isaac. In other words, the rabbis are making up a story to try and explain why he's sending them in this direction, to separate them from Isaac, who might otherwise perhaps feel impassioned and some kind of sense of anxiety or anger or jealousy or discomfort or whatever with these other sons. So Abraham, out of love, in a sense, for both of them, is trying to seek to separate them and send them different ways. So as I was reading this, I was putting this together in an entire picture, saying, maybe there's an overall lesson here that's being taught to us through this notion that, one, Sarah is mentioned, but her mention is really about her absence. And then we have this new wife, Keturah, and we have this midrash that comes in and said, actually, this is someone that Abraham used to know. This is someone who used to be a concubine wife of his. This is Hagar. And so bringing her back into this picture. And then with these additional 6 sons, we have these various midrashim who are saying that Abraham gave gifts to them. They may no longer be in our story. And then, in a sense, asking us, aren't you curious about them? Don't you want to know where they went? Don't you want to know how Abraham felt about them? And so Midrash begins to fill in, if you will, this curiosity that we have, not so much an intellectual curiosity, but kind of I would like to call it a compassionate curiosity. They're part of our story, and can't we fill in something about them? And so this is the power of Midrash, the note which comes from the Hebrew word lidrosh, which means to investigate, to search, to interrogate, in the hopes of bringing up a fuller picture. So as I start to think about Midrash, which many of us are familiar with generally, I came upon an absolutely lovely description of the power of Midrash. And it came from an interesting source. If you have a study sheet, I invite you to turn it over. What I'm going to share with you is from an article by Dr. Sally Longley, who wrote an article. Actually, it is for the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits in Australia. And she wrote an article called Midrash as a Creative Hermeneutic for the Festive Pilgrimage with Ignatius. So let me give you a little bit of way of introduction. Ignatius was a Spanish Catholic. He was born into nobility. He served in the military. He was a fierce warrior. And then in one of the battles, his leg was severely damaged as a result of a cannonball shot. And while he was recovering in a hospital, he had a series of visions. And he had a calling to become a priest. He does become a priest, and in addition to the calling to become a priest, he has a series of visions which has him develop a series of exercises to make oneself present in one's life and in the presence of God. And these become known as Ignatian spirituality exercises. And they are exercises that have been practiced for the last 500 years. They're practiced currently by people who are within the world of the Jesuits. I have a dear friend, Chuck, who is very close to the Jesuits and practices these exercises known as Ignatian spirituality. And they are designed, when reading the text, to place oneself in the story, to try and imagine oneself in the story, to look around, to absorb the sights and the smells and the sounds, and then to cause oneself to reflect on, and what do you see, and what do you feel, and what do you hear, and what is your life like in that moment within the sacred text. So here is what Dr. Sally Longley, writing for the Society of Jesuits in Australia, says about Midrash. The word Midrash is a Hebrew word meaning to search out, to seek, to inquire. Midrash is the imaginative retelling of a story based on the fact we know and imaginatively filling out those areas about which there is no record. They aim to give voice to the silences, the unknown, and the white spaces between words. Midrashic giving voice can release silences into the wide realm of images, art, drama, poetry, prose, and music. Midrash gives us permission to travel as explorers into the infinite depth of meaning and possibilities that arise. When we explore both what the text offers us, as well as the silences about Ignatius's life journey, we notice what might be behind and beyond the text. The power of story here, what she's suggesting, the power of story to cause us to see more than what's on the page, to go beyond the written text and to see that there are multiple possibilities that our reading of the text enables us to open up. Well, here's what the novelist George Eliot says. Appeals founded on generalizations and statistics require a sympathy ready-made. But a picture of human life, such as a great artist can give, surprises even the trivial and the selfish into attention. George Eliot here is teaching us about the power of story as opposed to mere analysis and an intellectual lecture, perhaps. The power of story to cause us to pique our curiosity about the characters and allows us as George Eliot says, to allow even the trivial and even the selfish can come into our attention. One of the great teachers of our time, a man named Michael Fishbane, has written a lovely, lovely book, which I highly recommend, called Sacred Attunement, A Jewish Theology. And he speaks this way about the power of Midrash. The artistic vision helps us to see that we see constructively and to perceive that the world is always coming into focus in numerous shades and angles. The reader is crucial in a very particular sense, for it is the reader who opens new pathways in the texture of the scripture and reveals new patterns in its warp and woof. You turn over, I'd like to have us spend a moment with the painting that's on the front by the French Impressionist Gustave Caillebotte. And this is a painting, Paris Street, Rainy Day. Caillebotte was born into a rather wealthy family. He inherited family wealth in his early 20s. He was a lawyer and then pursued painting. And at first he sought to have his paintings be accepted by the establishment and displayed at the annual Salon exhibition, and they were rejected as being vulgar because his subject matter was not considered by their standard to be uplifting, morally uplifting enough. They were too common. The subject matter was too common and not morally instructive enough, which was what the establishment was, that was their standard for what constituted appropriate and acceptable art. And so Caillebotte turned around literally and walked into the arms of the Impressionists and exhibited in 1875 his works there. So this is his piece, Paris Street, Raining Day. And one of the things that's remarkable to note about the Impressionists is that they began to paint within about 20 or so years after the development of photography. And photography had a profound impact on painters. One, because in a sense, it eliminated a significant portion of their livelihood, which was to paint portraitures of people. That was a nice way to make some income. With the development of photography, people turned to photography because it presented, one, a much more realistic image of themselves, and also they could get it much faster than waiting for an artist to paint a painting, and it was much less expensive. So artists began to give up portraiture as one of their primary sources of livelihood, and they began focusing on different aspects of what they had to contribute that was unique. And so the Impressionists introduced the notion of, instead of merely trying to replicate a reality, let me share with you my experience of reality. And that becomes kind of the basis of what the Impressionists introduced into the art world, which is that the subjectivity of the artist becomes an essential element of the art piece itself. When here, it also shows us that photography influenced how painters shaped what was and framed what was on their canvas. And here you can see our central figures. This couple that's facing us in the foreground is our primary human figures of attention. And yet they're looking off to the side of the canvas, as you're looking at the canvas to the left. So they're looking at something that isn't even pictured on the canvas. Perhaps we're wondering, what has grabbed their attention? What are they looking at? What can't we see? Why hasn't the painter chosen to include what has captured their attention? Perhaps it would capture ours as well. And then in front of them, with his back to us, is another character who's just entering the frame. And you can see that he's only partly in the picture. He's just entering. He's come from somewhere else. And you might wonder, where's he been? Why did the painter not wait for him to enter into the picture? Why not paint him fully in the picture? And so this is a notion in which the painter acknowledges what the photographer is also acknowledging, which is that we don't have the full picture. We make decisions about the extent and scope of what we're seeing, that we crop things, we frame things, but there's a lot more going on in the world than what we're able to capture on the copper plate for the photographer or on the canvas for the painter. And so the Impressionist here has us provoked to wonder what else is going on in these lives? What else is going on that we can't see that's on the canvas? Where are all those other people going? Where have they been? There's a carriage in the left side of the canvas that's kind of half hidden by another umbrella. Why would you paint the carriage in such a way that we can't see who's in the carriage? I wonder who's in the carriage. I wonder where it's going. And then if you look deeper, you can see more people, and you can see stores and buildings. And now we're equally provoked. I wonder where they're all going. Well, why are they so scattered? Why aren't people talking to one another? Well, why are they holding their umbrellas in a way that also hides themselves from one another? So this notion about what both appears on the canvas is provocative, and then equally so is the notion that there are things that we can't see that cause us to wonder. So I've entitled this week's study session, "To be Curious About the Absent," because I think that's what Midrash is intended to do. It's an expression of curiosity, and more than curiosity, it's also an expression of a compassion about the storyline of people who may not have a voice in the story, whose part of the story may be cut short, or even those who are fully written into the story. There are aspects of their lives that we don't know about, such as when we first encountered Abraham. We wondered, where did he come from? Why is he the one that God has chosen to start a whole new nation? I think what Torah is asking us to do here is not just to look at the written text this way. It's asking us to look at one another this way, to realize there's more to you than everything that I'm seeing. And to get to know the fullness of you, I need to ask some questions. And the questions come from a sense of caring. They come from a sense of compassion. They come from a sense of wanting to know more fully your story, because perhaps I can enter your story too, and you can enter mine. And won't that be more fulsome? With that, I'd love to hear what you saw and experienced in the reading of our portion. If you'd like to raise your hand, I'd love to call upon you. Let me call upon David and Jay and Kath and Martin. So go ahead, David. And you'll have to unmute. Thank you.
I have to know how to unmute,
Okay.
Which is the new phrase. It's entered the Jewish world, unmute. As through the reading and through your commentator, I suddenly had a picture of a different way of looking at goneness, but not a different way. It's the way you read it when you first read it. The very first time you're reading the story, it's kind of superficial. There's a story about something, And then people are gone, like the 6 children of Abraham are gone, but you don't know it yet. They could pop up at any time and be back in the story. And sometimes they do. So you don't know what the absence is until you're done reading the story.
If we're ever done reading the story.
If we are ever done reading the story.
Thank you, David. Thank you. That's beautiful. And then Jay, and then Martin, and then Kath. Yes, Jay.
Hi, I'm an unmute Nick. I notice in the painting that those dressed with layers of clothes, very upscale and apparently more well-to-do, are protecting themselves from the rain. But if you look, any of the people that aren't dressed as well don't have umbrellas.
Mm-hmm.
The rider of that carriage in the background with the horse has an umbrella, and the person behind the umbrella on the right doesn't. This is obviously a day when that's overcast was able to create shadows of the man walking at kind of an angle next to the lamppost. I understand how he cast a shadow when the sky is, it's rain coming down. I've never seen anyone cast a shadow with rain coming down. And thank you for the guidelines into looking at things that are there and then actually seeing things that aren't there. And then it's the same. It's the same as the Torah. By the way, we'll be finished with all the interpretations, I'm sure, at the end of the session here. Everything will be complete.
Oh, thank you, Jay. All right, Martin.
I have a number of comments about the context that interest me and I want to share with you. I believe that the Nation of Islam traces their ultimate paternity to the son of Hagar. And when we're talking about a number of people who are sent east, I think that is a euphemism for sending them to obviously what is now Jordan, but Arabia. They populate and become the Nation of Islam. That's why we don't hear about them anymore. And no one names their children after those people. They're unknown names. So I think that's the significance. At least that's the way I interpret it. At the beginning of our Torah portion, they mention that Abraham was offered the cave of Machpelah free, without charge, to bury Sarah, which he refuses. Why does he refuse a free gift? My answer is because he wanted that paternity forever for him and his descendants, and Jews to this day claim that land as being a part of our nation. And Dave has a picture, for those of you who haven't been to Hebron, of the structure over the cave of Machpelah, which I have visited. And interestingly enough, while the second temple was destroyed, that structure was built by Herod, King Herod. And that's our best understanding of what the temple might have looked like in its day when it stood. So that's interesting to me. Abraham paid for the cave with shekels. That's the money we still use to this day in Israel. Did they have coins then? No, they didn't have coins. Well, what are the shekels then? They are weights of silver that was later adopted to use to call it the coin. But they're weights, and it was a significant amount of money. He probably overpaid for it because the understanding, this is also some rabbinical tradition, is that he knew that there was a passageway to an eternal life at that spot, and he wanted that spot. And to this day, if you go to the Cave of Machpelah, you will see the door that presumably will lead you to the other world.
Wow.
So I find all these things interesting.
Martin, thank you so much for bringing all that rich history into it, and for having us direct our attention as well towards Dave's wonderful background photograph. That's so instructive. Thank you. Let me call upon Kath, and then Catherine and Paul and Richard. So go ahead, Kath.
Thank you. I thought it was interesting that Abraham was sending his head servant off to find a wife for his son, and his son was off finding a wife for Abraham. Which, until I knew that Keturah was Hagar, I didn't put that together while I was reading the Torah portion, but when I was reading your study sheet, then I knew that Hagar was that. Any thoughts on?
Well, what you've got me thinking about was that just as the father recognizes that there's an absence in his son's life, the son recognizes that there's an absence in the father's life, and there's a mutual attempt to repair those absences for the other. So that's very nice. Thank you. Let me call Catherine and Paul, and then Richard, did you have something? Okay, Catherine.
Yeah, two thoughts. One is that when we look at the painting, we're faced with the possibility of turning left or right around that corner. And that resonated with me immediately with the Parshat, with the servant who says, please tell me that I may turn right or left.
Oh, wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
I hadn't put that together. Thank you, Catherine.
Yeah, and I'm always struck by the trust that Rebecca places in this person. There is trust from the time that she pours the water and welcomes him to her home. And so I think that is a sign of some kind of, I don't know how to call it other than divine intuition that she feels, which goes beyond what you would ordinarily experience.
It's a very dramatic moment too, this notion about at first her father is having these negotiations with the Abraham's servant, and then they said, well, let's ask her, bring her in, and they said will you go with this man? And she immediately says, I will. So it kind of goes along with this notion about her certainty. She has no hesitation, and her clarity and her power that she's already expressing here, which we'll see develop even further. So thank you for pointing all that out. Thank you. Paul, and then Richard.
Yeah, what it is, the first, I understand the first part of the Parsha, but the second part I have a hard time with, and it's certainly repeated over and over again in other Parshas. The first part has to do with shidduch or shaliach. It reminds me a little bit like my father, actually. It reminds me of Abraham in a way. My father was worried about the daughter-in-law I was going to get for him. So it's an exact story, but he didn't have camels. He didn't have servants. It was basically, he was depending on his son. And so it's a story I could relate to. On the other hand, the second half, where it happens over and over again in the different parshas, where they talk about the names of all, this one married this one, and then they had 7 sons, and they give you the names of each son. I'm wondering, the first part I could understand. There's a story and there's a message. Is there a message with the repeated use, not only in this parsha, but in other parshas, where they just go through names, and how do we relate to that? This one had 6 persons. It's not enough. Oh, but they have these names.
So let me just share this with you, which is in the last few months, I've been very focused on the family tree. With the death of my mother, kind of being ever more curious about names of people that I heard of, but perhaps in my haste to pursue my own life, I didn't inquire enough about, well, who exactly was this great uncle, and what did he do, and where did he live, and what was he interested in, and what kind of food did he eat, and did he play music, and all these questions that I failed to ask. And so the tragedy in my life is that so many of these people remain, in a sense, absent to me. How much richer would my life be if I was able to fill out their storyline within my own family? How much bigger and more intimate would my world be if I had asked enough of those questions? And I think that's the way Torah is designed intentionally. From the very opening words of Torah, it's designed to provoke us to ask questions. And because it's only in the asking of the questions that we involve ourselves in the lives of others, not by merely being passive observers. So I think this notion about having these names here, in a sense, is Torah's way of saying, don't you want to know more? And Midrash steps in, and through perhaps its own fantasy, more than its own history, it begins to try and flesh out who some of these people might have been. As Martin indicates, well, we can say these, even though the text itself doesn't say what happens to Ishmael and all the lines and who these other people are, that's the Midrash will step in, the early rabbis will step in and say, we need to know more because we care. We care. And that's what Torah is trying to model for us, is to care and to want to know more. So let me invite Richard, and then I'll get to Robert and Margot. Yeah.
Real quickly, one is this business of going to the right or left. That's elsewhere. You'll do what's here in the Torah. You won't move to the right, you won't to the left. That's it, straight path. It'll take you there for state. By virtue of staying on the path, you will get to the destination that God wants for you. Another thing is that you speak of the absent person who's absent, and this business of Isaac immediately taking Rebekah into Sarah's tent I've always felt that. And now when you mention that she got scared, Sarah, at, daddling with her husband, so old, he was old. She wasn't complaining, I'm too old for kids. She said, really, am I, at my age, gonna dally with him? She has Isaac. And then he's saved by whatever reason, and her life is done. And so the one Midrash says she's scared, and so her soul leaves. Well, I think her soul, speaking of what you said about your father having a daughter-in-law, I think what she did is went right into the tent. Because how are these kids going to get along without her? She's the mother of Israel. That's all I got.
Thank you, Richard. And that's a very, very heartfelt, beautiful picture about the role of the tent and the comfort that Isaac finds there. And then your notion about left and right, looking back at the painting, in the painting, there's this lamppost that's perhaps designed to bifurcate.
Perhaps. That's pretty obvious.
Is to bifurcate the image there. And yet what happens is, even though it's bifurcated, we're tossed and turned in so many different directions, because on the one hand, we have this couple coming straight at us, but their gaze is off to the left of the frame, and yet anchoring us back to the right side of the frame is this individual that's coming into the frame. And then in the background and the middle ground, there are people moving in all kinds of directions, a carriage that's moving off to the left, people moving to the right. And so for such an image that seems to be so still, there's so much movement in it. And again, that brings me back to our text, which is the words are settled on the page, but there's so much movement within it and there's so much provocation within our text because of so much of the material that's left out, or that is underneath, or that is voiceless, or that is ambiguous. And so we're aware of the movement within the text, just as we're aware of the movement within this painting here, even though everyone seems to be frozen in time and space. Let me call upon Robert. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you again for such a lovely evening. I was really touched by the example of Rebecca. I mean, now we're going back 3,500 years. Here's a beautiful young maiden, humble, selfless, courteous, focused on generosity of spirit, making sure that the servant has accommodations, timeless qualities that are eternal in the past and the future. These qualities are forever. And oftentimes, I believe women represent the spirit of man. And that's what our spirit should be, all those qualities. And I know all of you have those qualities. That's why I'm so comfortable sharing it. The other thing that comes to mind, and plus obedience, she had a vision of God's pleasure. She had insight and intuition, and she submitted to that. She didn't submit, quote, to a man, if you will. She submitted to what I understood to be the will of God. Now, I learned something tonight. You know, I've learned that midrash means to search, to search out, to seek, to inquire. Okay, this is a trite comment, but if you look at this picture, everyone is involved in their own worldly affairs. This couple is looking off into nowhere. They're the only ones who are actually looking for something, which to me ties into midrash. Okay, there you go. Okay, they're seeking something out there. Okay.
That's lovely. Thank you. Okay. Hey, Steve, please share with us. And you'll have to unmute.
Okay, this is real quick without anything really profound except trying to. This picture reminded me of another picture which I've seen in this context or on this forum. And well, I suppose I could ask, do you know what picture this reminds me of? But I'll make it simple and just tell you. I went looking for maybe this artist, Kelly Abbott, did the other one, but the other picture is so totally different, but you've been talking about them similarly. Anyway, last Korach, Parshat, you put up a picture titled In England, and it's impressionistic, but you know, I saw I was looking to see what the similarities are. I don't know what they are. I won't go what they mean, but you know, some of the same discussion took place over the In England picture, and maybe you can describe the picture I'm talking about faster than I can.
No, I'm not going to do that, but what I will say is that just generally the impressionists, as opposed to classical painters, who sought to portray what they viewed as being eternal and absolute. The impressionists were aware of the world being fleeting and momentary, and that's what they tried to share, was their particular encounter with a moment, rather than trying to replicate what would be eternal and absolute. And so this is, in a sense, when we're reading this text, which is, you know, thousands of years old, we're, on the one hand, are we reading something that is eternal and absolute? Or, as perhaps Midrash is hinting at, the way to read it is to read it as everything is actually in motion. Nothing has really been finally resolved. And indeed, even when we get to the notion of Jewish law, halakha, the notion about halakha is that there is no final and absolute answer. Nothing is ever absolutely resolved, finally resolved. Everything is in development. We need to make decisions in halakha. We need to make decisions of how to act based upon a case that's been presented. But things evolve and change. And so I think that's what this rich tradition of how we read something that is presented as if it looks as if it's done, a done story. And Midrash is trying to tell us there's more to the story than what's on the page. And more important than being a reader of words, Torah is trying to tell us to be a reader of other human beings. To read another human being, this is a way to, what Torah is modeling for us is how to read human beings, not just words. To read human beings as human beings are constantly in development. There's nothing settled finally about a human being. There's always more possibilities there than currently are being manifested. And so to be curious about the absent is an expression of compassion and how to fulfill ourselves and one another in this world, to bring out more that perhaps than what's been brought out. You know, I was thinking about a therapeutic setting. So I was thinking about a good therapist will be someone who will try and draw out a deeper and more fulfilling aspect of than what the person has initially presented. You know, my father hit me when I spoke this way to my mother, and so I ran away. And so a good therapist is going to ask a lot of questions as a way to try and let's see if we can expand upon that. Let's see if we can dig deeper than what you have already settled upon as an answer to what happened 30 years ago. And so that's what I think this text is modeling for us, and the way to read it, which is what Midrash is about, is not just about reading words, it's about reading one another in our own lives. And so I want to express gratitude to each and all of you for creating the kind of environment that allows us to not just read these words in this book, but to read one another and to draw out more of one another, and in the course of it, draw out more of ourselves than perhaps we were even aware of an hour ago. And so I'm very grateful for this moment. Margot, please share with us.
You know, we're reading this and the list of names, and I maintain it still exists today. All of these sites that people are contacting to find out the names of their, you know, through the DNA of their first cousins who they may have never met, but they're all, and then having conversation and learning that so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so was born to my great-grandfather, though I may never have met them. These sites are wonderful, and we're still doing it today, wanting to know the names and who begot who begot who.
And of course, the great contribution perhaps of the whole DNA story is the lesson that we're all related.
Yeah.
And if we can live that way. Susan, please.
So just a quick anecdote to tie all of this together is that my brother did do, I think he did ancestry.com, and he got contacted by somebody that said, oh, you're my cousin. You're my first cousin. We have one first cousin. And this was an unknown person. So it turns out she was adopted during her lifetime in Australia. During her lifetime, she went looking for her mother. Her mother got pregnant when my dad's brother was on R&R during World War II. Yeah. And she actually knew his name.
Right.
Not how to contact him, but knew his name. So we were able to ascertain that that there is a hole that we filled in that we didn't even know was a hole in our family, because we now have a first cousin.
Yeah, I've been contacted by some cousins of mine, and it's wonderful to find them. And again, to know that we're all from the same great grandfather, you know. And you know,
I'm convinced.
Well, Margot, I
name was
thought you were
important.
my cousin all along.
Oh, I would like to be your cousin.
Well,
You're
this
my
is,
sister.
I also had a comment.
okay, go ahead, David.
Looking at the painting as a photograph and looking at the foreground, there's an elephant in the room, and that is 1 second after, maybe 1.5 seconds after the photograph was taken. The two big umbrellas collided.
Yep, maybe
You're getting more like me all the time.
And maybe as a result of that collision, they will start talking to one another and go have a cup of coffee. And
What were you looking at over there that was so entrancing? Or why were you looking at your feet instead of where you were going?
whatever opens up the conversation is a gift. And I want to say each one of you is a gift in my life. And I look forward to our regathering. Be well, everyone. God bless you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.